Welcome back. Thanks for joining us. This is Will with Perpetual Assets. Thrilled to have our friend back on the line, Mr. Jim Willie. He is the editor of the Hat Trick Letter, which is found on the website thegoldenjackass.com. Jim, welcome, my friend.
Oh, it's good to be back, Will. I keep saying it every time I'm on a show. So much is happening. But what we're going to try to do today is give maybe a different angle on some of the commonly viewed factors and events going on. There's always a lot going on. We're in an acceleration phase of the end game.
Yeah, it's you mentioned that you'd been under the weather and took a day off and that you felt you were, behind on some of the news. It's unbelievable how fast things develop to the point where I've had a busy week these last 5-6 days and haven't really stuck my head into much media stuff, and I feel like I'm lost. I have no idea what's going on. Just in overlooking headlines for our interview this morning, it's unbelievable. You have to stay vigilant on top of the news daily to really know what the heck's going on.
You do, and what's captured a lot of the news is this Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Some people call it the replacement for the International Monetary Fund, but not really. Maybe 30 years ago, the IMF has significantly morphed. It's now more like an office for asset seizure for victimized, debt-ridden nations. It's the AIIB is more like a World Bank replacement. But in the last several days, gosh, in addition to the laundry list of nations a week ago, that was Australia. I'm going to, this off the top of my head, Australia, Britain, Italy, France, Germany, Luxembourg, and Switzerland. And now we've got Netherlands, Austria, South Korea. Wow. Taiwan is now thinking about it. Denmark is in. And Japan announced that they were in, but then they now took their foot out of the door. In other words, the U.S. government threatened to kill some of their officials.
Sure.
Georgia and Turkey are now in. So this is really important because the importance, I'm repeating the word, this is really important because the significance of the AIIB is that it's one of several platforms on which the dollar rests, on which the dollar derives its power. You got the International Monetary Fund, you got the World Bank, you got the SWIFT bank system, you got the Treasury bonds used as banking reserves. That's not a platform, but it's a practice. Mm-hmm. And all these are going away. So when I say the dollar is going to go away and vanish and be replaced and be rejected and be shunned, I think it's going to happen by means of the vanishing or the collapsing of the platforms. Mm-hmm. So this is very important. And Japan and Germany and Korea are extremely important, along with Britain. Those four nations, watch them just gradually move one more step away every month away from the U.S. and the dollar. And when you saw Obama sheepishly say to the British, oh, there you go again, catering to the Chinese, I think he's making reference to the fact that London won an RMB hub facility for the Chinese currency. That's for bond and currency trading. Well, how, can you blame Britain for wanting to survive?
So, Jim, all of this is it fair to say all of this is a response to QE?
I think QE really accelerated all the different anti-dollar platform development. Uh-huh. Okay, imagine you're a country. I like pointing out South Korea. They're a great example because they're not on any G7. They're not on any, real big important SWIFT policy board, but they're a big manufacturing country. Mm-hmm. They've got some big brand names. You don't need to name them all. We know who they are. It's LG and uh, Samsung, Hyundai. Okay, they've got the names. They've got the reserves. So when the QE starts, they react by saying, you're undermining our entire national savings that are set up as our national bank reserves. We save in treasury bonds, and you're printing money like Zimbabwe.
Yep.
This is third world. I mean, Americans, I'm sorry to say it, I don't think they know what capitalism is anymore. I don't think they know what money is anymore. And I don't think they recognize what QE is as hyperinflation.
Yep.
So it's impossible to justify anymore this hypermonetary inflation unless you're severely stupid. The finance sector called it stimulus. Okay, let them call it stimulus. Well, if they're stimulating so much the treasury bonds, why is the dollar swap market drying up and having almost no liquidity anymore? Why are there no more buyers and no more volume? Well, they have some. Why is there severely reduced volume in the treasury bond market? They've wrecked the bond market already. It's been 3+, maybe almost 4 years of QE. Everything it touches, it wrecks. So the Western central bank franchise system, I believe, has no more credibility. They're lying about the severe volume. We were told that it was $70 billion a month for treasuries and mortgage bonds, and then they're told it's $40 billion. Then we're told later, no, it's actually more than that. And then we hear about the secret bailout of Citibank and other banks, and they got maybe $2 trillion, $3 trillion. It's a gigantic backdoor Wall Street bailout, while in the previous years, there wasn't so much QE, there was just direct loans for $23 trillion to the owners and investors behind the Federal Reserve System. So it doesn't have any credibility anymore, while these nations watch their national savings undermined by what I call the steady acidic drip. So QE is a lie, and its effect is much worse than what they describe. And then on top of all that, these same architects of QE are doing negative interest rates. They're doing bail-in threats. They haven't had very many bail-in actual events. So I think that the central bank credibility behind the dollar and all the paper fiat currency Forex system, credibility's shot.
Yeah.
So that's the effect of QE. So as the Eastern nations watch this, they see the same thing that South Korea does. They've got their industry, they've got their development, they've got their savings, and they think, wow, you've got advanced industrialized nations resorting to QE and bond monetization in an unsterilized manner. And of course, the German Bundesbank argued vigorously against the Draghi European Central Bank. Do not do this in unsterilized fashion. And what that means, by the way, is that the Draghi Central Bank argued that they would drain money out from over there while they put new money in over here. In the United States and Britain, they don't do that. They just print money and shove it into the system. Unsterilized, unmatched by removals. So these Eastern nations witness all the damage, witness the threat to their savings also, and decide, why should we use the dollar in trade settlement? Let's build our own platform. So that's when they come up with the new development bank. I've got an interesting angle to share. We cited the AIIB, the Infrastructure Investment Bank for Asia, but I don't believe it's going to be entirely Asia. It might be. I could be wrong. It could be wrong. But let's see how they widen it. Will it include Indonesia? Will it include a project in, say, Borneo or Singapore?
Yeah.
Will it maybe do something or other in New Zealand and Australia?
Yep.
Will they do maybe just one or two in the Middle East,
Mm-hmm.
in the Gulf region, Persian Gulf region? Will they maybe do a token one in South America? Okay, so the development bank, the new development bank, I don't believe is going to be a development bank. I think the AIIB is going to be the development bank, and it's going to have a wrong name, a misnomer. They're calling it the Asian IIB. I think it's going to be the global IIB for infrastructure and development, because I think the new development bank might have two purposes. One will be for, the Tanzanian Railroad in Africa, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe support facilities along the Pacific coast of South America, whatever.
Right.
But I think half of the new development bank is going to become the BRICS Gold Central Bank, where they convert treasury bonds and all kinds of other major nation sovereign debt, convert the treasury bonds and other debt into gold bullion for the central bank of the BRICS.
You think that'll be a major purpose of the development bank?
Yes, I think it's going to have two purposes, and they didn't want to call it. I mean, imagine if they called it the BRICS Gold Central Bank. We're going to have some funding.
No, that wouldn't.
We'd like to have a conference and discuss this. And yes, we realize you Americans are going to bring your agents and probably have some explosives in your in your briefcases. Okay, no, they call it development bank, and later they'll say something like this. For expedience, since the $200 billion is more than we can possibly invest quickly, we're going to split this in two. Half will be for the projects for development in emerging markets and third world nations, and the other half we're going to convert to gold because this is a necessity, and we got the money. And the money just happens to be loaded down in treasury bonds, and we have our suspicions that they're not safe in that form. Okay, that's what QE has done. Undermine the whole credibility of the global financial system. So we're going to see, I believe, the gold standard come back through the trade side, the trade ramps.
Very, very interesting. I mean, we're literally watching. We're literally watching the events unfold. We're watching the infrastructure be put together on the global stage to counteract. I mean, these are essentially just these are nations. These are sovereign entities that are trying to do essentially the same thing many of our listeners are doing, many of our clients are doing: protect their ass, and by that I mean assets. But it's anyway. What do you make of this coming isolation, Jim? I mean, to the U.S., not only the dollar, but the U.S. economy and culture. I mean, talk about lost allies.
Well, the U.S. is basically telling the Eastern world and the developing world, the emerging markets, they're basically telling them, how dare you try to protect your assets? How dare you? We are the king dollar advocates, and if you try to break from that fold, you're inviting trouble. So what we're doing is we're isolating ourselves. I made a forecast back in late 2012 and early 13. I said the U.S. is going to suffer unspeakable isolation. And, one of the factors behind the isolation at an early stage, and this is my opinion, and I'm entitled to an opinion. I think people realize that my opinions in time are often borne out. But I believe the swine flu and the other Ebola, I think it undermined a lot of U.S. credibility and forced some isolation. If not isolation in commerce and finance, it was an isolation of, say, leadership and thought. The American thinking is the following. Okay, well, now the American thinking is dominated by ISIS and other guerrilla armies and mercenaries, and that's not flying over very well either. Right. So the wars, gosh, the Kenyan squatter sits in the White House, and he got a Peace Prize from Nobel in '09. Do people realize that the man in charge of that decision was demoted?
Really?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He was
at
just
Nobel.
demoted. He's now a regular member. He's no longer the what do you call it? I don't think they call it cabinet director. I think he used to be a director. So he put forth the recommendations, and it was approved and endorsed, and so Obama got a Peace Prize. And when I heard that, I mean, this is laughter. I mean, what did he ever do? He didn't have even a single piece of legislation on his name in the Congress.
Right.
So he was a perfect puppet, yet he got a Peace Prize. I first thought, well, how much did that cost out of narco money? Because Obama has a $1 billion Vatican bank account that was put there 1 week after his inauguration. So this is how the U.S. presidency works.
Wow.
So now the Peace Prize president has 3 wars going on. Ukraine, Syria, and now Yemen. Don't expect the Saudi royal family to survive this. Get back to me in a year and let me know if the guy who replaced Abdullah is still sitting on their version of a peacock throne. So the U.S. deals with war to defend the dollar. I said in '05 we use war and threat of war and use of military hardware to defend the dollar. And, you know, I got some laughter in '05, but I pointed out to how South Korea announced in '05 that they wanted to diversify out of treasury bonds to some extent in their bank reserves management system. And 1 week later, the U.S. Navy shows up off the coast of Seoul to do naval exercises.
Golly. I mean, just obvious, right? 2005, man, that's early.
It's obvious to people who have a brain, Will.
Well, and obvious to the nation, right? I mean,
I don't think, well, to South Korea, but
not
to the American nation.
No, of course not. But I mean, the average.
I mention that to American people, and they say we do exercises all over the place. Big deal.
Yeah.
Okay. So combine the wars with sanctions, collateral seizures, events like Cyprus, which is a misdirected event. That was to block the Russian usage of Cyprus banks as a window to the Western banking system. That was the first act of war financially against Russia, Cyprus. And Russia was also using Cyprus to convert their treasury bonds into gold. So Cyprus was an act of war. We also use bail-in threats. We have poorly crafted trade union propositions like the Asian, what's it called, Trans-Pacific Partnership. Nobody in Asia wants it. None. Only Japan is talking about it because we have a puppet in power there in Tokyo. All right, and the Europeans don't want the TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. Nobody in Europe wants it. So we're trying to shove these corporate power grab trade unions down the world's throat, and they're responding by signing on with the Chinese-led non-dollar platforms. So they're all working together. We have a full generation of hegemony by the United States with finance, military, and maybe not so much commerce. This is another angle, how to look, a perspective rather, to look at, and I think it makes a lot of sense. In the 80s, we started outsourcing. In the 90s, it really accelerated. After 2000, with China getting the most favored nation status for trade, we had a grand acceleration of outsourcing that even included Japan outsourcing to China. So all the emerging markets started having tremendous savings, and China was added to that list, and now I believe they got $3.5 trillion in savings. So here's the big backfire. All the outsourcing effects, here we are 30 years later, have resulted in a tremendous accumulation of wealth, a tremendous, formation, capital formation of industrial base for the emerging market nations. And they've decided, we don't want to use the dollar.
Yep.
So the backfire of outsourcing is diversification away from the dollar and a rebellion and rejection of the dollar. And they're signing on in droves to the Chinese-led non-dollar platforms.
Sure they are. They're sitting on $3.5 trillion in savings, and we're sitting on 18 whatever trillion in debt.
Well, that's just China. You add up all the emerging market nations, you get a lot more. And furthermore, the Persian Gulf nations, they don't like that name, the Gulf region nations. I sometimes call them the Arab Emirates. I added up all their sovereign wealth funds last summer, a year ago, and I came up with $2.2 trillion. Mm-hmm. Half of that was UAE only, United Arab Emirates only.
Right.
So add up emerging market, add in the Gulf region Emirates, add in China, and you've got something on the order of about perhaps $8 to $10 trillion that don't want the treasuries anymore. This is the foreign component of the treasuries that's over 50%, and they don't like to talk about that. Over 50% of treasury bond ownership is non-American, non-U.S.
So that 8 to 10 trillion in wealth, in savings, is not just in gold or local currencies or whatever. It's specifically in U.S. T-bills or bonds or whatever.
Well, just take a look at the Chinese. They've got $3.5 trillion, and they're very vocal about how they've got $1.3 trillion, and it's going down slowly. It might be about 1.1 or, yeah, I think about 1.1 now. They're even with Japan. Mm-hmm. So I guarantee you Japan is not diversified into gold, but China might be. I actually think China's lying about the amount of treasury bonds they hold. Mm-hmm. I think they certainly have some. I don't think they hold $1.1 trillion worth. When it peaked at 1.3, I don't think they really held 1.3. I think they got about 75 or 80% of that. Mm-hmm. But they're not going to say, hey, last month we diversified $3 billion in treasuries into gold, right. And we really like accumulating our gold. They don't talk about what they do with their reserves. So we've got some antiquated data to placate the U.S. masters. Yeah. And the U.S. masters are going to be isolated and really become not so much masters as Lord of the Flies on the U.S. island, on the global sphere. This is going to be very, very painful, what comes. We have resentment, over the wars and sanctions. We have backfire. So. We have backfires over the political heavy-handed manner of using the IMF and the World Bank and SWIFT. We've got abuse of sanctions. We've got abuse of officers who in the World Bank are discovered to be really Langley agents, mm-hmm. who are collecting data and signing on various corporate heads with bribery. They're not doing development bank functions. They're doing financial espionage functions. The resentment is tremendous. And I have a very simple saying that I tell to friends and colleagues and some clients: whatever the U.S. government touches turns to shit. Mm-hmm. We corrupt it and defraud it.
We can see that. We can
remember, fascists attack their enemies, defraud their allies, and end up earning isolation.
Case in point, Mussolini's Italy, right?
What about Italy?
Well, just where the fascism, what it leads to, what the goals are and the intent, and then where it heads. Let's talk a little bit about Greece and Turkey. The strategic importance of those two countries and what we're seeing develop now because of it.
Well, first of all, this is a very strategic region. I mean, I'm not sure a third of the American audience could really point to where Turkey and Greece are on the map. Mm-hmm. I mean that very sincerely. Yeah. It's in the far corner of Europe, Western Europe, to the point where it's really just they're south of Eastern Europe. Their northern neighbors are what we call Eastern Europe. Take a look at the history of Greece. Pardon me. I'm getting over a cold, but I'm almost there. Got a rough throat. Greece has always controlled the Bosporus Straits. We're talking about Corinth. it's in ancient writings. The old economies pointed out how Greece earned a lot of. They were basically tariffs. They didn't have a ferry, but I joke and say, well, it was like Greece was the ferryman. The ferryman collected tolls. They were the toll takers for commerce that went through the Bosphorus Straits. It's a very important strategic area. So while we're dicking around with the Greek debt and the big Western banks are seizing assets on guarantees of debt failures, one stage after another, we're going to lose control of the Bosphorus Straits. We're going to lose control of the military potential of the Eastern Mediterranean Sea, and we're going to lose it to the Russian naval fleet. Hey, great job, European Union. Great job. I mean, first they sign up for this stupid U.S.-led fascist war in Kiev and all the stupid propaganda about Russia invading the Crimea that even some of my family members gobbled up like bullshit in the Commodore. Mm-hmm. I'm sick of it. So we're going to be facing the Russians and the Chinese moving in with both feet to the Greek area and the Turkish ports and their access to the sea and their port facilities and their shipping companies and all the strategic trappings that come with it. And then you saw Russia doing a brilliant move, canceling out the South Stream for Gazprom natural gas pipelines and making it through Turkey and announcing exact port location in Greece where it will end up with the exact specifications. By that I mean you're going to have a pipe that ends up in this town. The pipe is going to have this diameter. The pipe's going to have this amount of flow. And get ready. Mm-hmm. So Russia is going to be controlling Greece and Turkey in a matter of months. Good job, EU. How'd that work out? Don't they have any comprehension of the concept in capitalism called debt liquidation? No, instead they make it stage after stage of asset seizure to the point now that Greece is realizing they don't have any gold at all left. The deadline is passed for the IMF repayment of the Greek debt. So now the Greeks are saying, we're going to renege on the IMF debt, but we're going to pay the European Central Bank debt. In other words, the IMF has no more power. It's an empty office with a, how shall I call it, a man posing as Christine Lagarde as officer. I don't make jokes. A man posing as Christine Lagarde as officer of the empty IMF that the U.S. government has refused to pay its fees for the last 2 years after China took control of the IMF and funded it amply. So the IMF is now doing two functions: overseeing the asset grabs from defaulted sovereign debts from victimized debt-burdened nations, but the IMF is also enabling, well, actually maybe there are two other functions, stealing funds. Remember the IMF made a loan to Kiev, Ukraine, about 8 or 10 months ago of, I think, $2.3 billion. 90% of the money is missing. Jeez. Okay, so what is the IMF's function? I think it's a slush fund window. And take a look 10 years ago. Remember we had stories about India was selling their gold, and take a closer look for this IMF announcement, and you found out that it was really more like ledger items with the Bank of England. So the IMF's function 10 years ago was not development loans to developing nations, No, not loans, but instead it was overseeing the propaganda to make false stories about how nations were giving up their gold. So it went from propaganda stories about gold sales to IMF doing asset seizures, and now lately IMF delivering slush funds to Kiev where all the money goes missing. The money is missing just like the Kiev central bank gold that went to the New York Fed. So, there's a lot going on with these nations, but I think what's going to be really important is that Greece and Turkey are going to become important members that are really, like nations with one foot in Europe. I don't consider Greece Europe. I'm sorry. I consider Greece to be unique. It's like an old Greek civilization remnant, and they lost their way. They're now more like a resort series of islands, Mykonos. And can you really tell me what are the main industries of Greece? I mean, okay, what is it? Olives?
Feta? I don't know.
Feta, olives, and goats? I mean, come on. I got some Greek friends, and I say, gosh, what is going on with your country? I mean, can't you stand up? And they say, I guess not. All right, so they're going to become members with one foot in Europe. Turkey's not a European country.
No.
They're a Muslim version of a European wannabe.
It's the gateway, right?
It's the gateway, right. These are gateway nations, and I think I'm glad you brought that exact word up because they're going to be gateways to Europe for the Eurasian trade zone, which Putin likes to call now, this is an interesting term, the Eurasian Economic Union, not the European Union. So the Eurasian Economic Union might be designed by name to replace the European Union. Turkey is unique in that it has a giant NATO air base. And every time I hear about heroin distribution from the Afghan centerpiece, where it went from 200 tons a year to 1,300 tons a year under American leadership.
Yeah.
Not by accident. That's vertical integration, including chemical factories with trucks, big trucks, chemical trucks. They're not carrying gasoline. They're carrying chemicals for poppy processing.
Right.
Okay, every time I hear about the Afghan heroin distribution, I hear about the Turkish NATO base as being a primary distribution point. So what's going to happen with that? I don't know. We also got this shift, as I mentioned, of the Gazprom pipeline that will really amplify, away from Ukraine, it'll amplify the importance of Greece. Greece is going to earn money on this. Russia has not been doing so much pipeline work in Greece and Turkey. They're doing very large-scale energy projects in Turkey, like natural gas storage centers, like nuclear plants, like electricity generating centers in Turkey. And I think they're going to do the same thing in Greece. And I think they're going to expand their railway network too. Now watch China enter, and I believe we're going to see them start buying up Southern European pigs, agricultural businesses.
Right.
And the G in pigs is Greece. I think they're going to buy Portuguese, Italian, Greek, and Spanish farms. And when the Chinese do that, then finally the Europeans are going to say, we've had enough. We're not going to lose our agricultural business to China. Revolutions are about food supply, food prices. And I think that's going to be the brick wall for final backlash, final standing up. And I think the Germans are already there. I just saw a YouTube of a German corporate official actually stating, we're really not part of the European Union anymore.
Wow.
Now, he means that in heart and in practice for individual deals. But, yeah, there's a European commissioner who pretends to rule over everybody I mean, people really need to take a close look at what these European commissioners are. They're unelected, and the presidents, the duly elected presidents of member nations, answer and report to the unelected European Union commissioners. Can you say dictators?
Yeah, it's a joke.
That system is going to get blown away.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Greece and Turkey, in summary, are two crowbars to divide Europe after the Ukraine war made the initial split.
Mm-hmm. Well, the strategic location, and industry supports just that. It's interesting. So you mentioned, that the Chinese coming in to basically take up interest and ownership in farm and food production in Southern Europe. So on the RMB, on the renminbi, the Chinese currency, these hubs, these swap facilities, and then the London Frankfurt axis, you wanted to touch on that as well. Can you elaborate? Tie that in, if you will, right? So we get the Chinese strategically playing the game as well, sort of alongside the Russians, and then enter these RMB swap facilities.
The defiance for this manifested in anti-dollar support for the anti-dollar platforms, support for non-dollar trade settlement. I made a forecast shortly after the Ukraine war began. I said Russia will eventually start trading their energy output in non-dollar. Mm-hmm. And they announced in a matter of 2 months that they were taking rubles and RMB, Chinese currency. So you've got all these. The introduction, Will, was in 07 and 06 with Brazil. They were really the test case. They were the, prototype for the yuan swap facility. They said, China and Brazil have a lot of trade. We don't need the dollar. And this is, two nations don't need the dollar to conduct trade.
Right.
They can use the Chinese yuan if China's involved. They can use the Chinese yuan if China's not involved, and they can use barter if they choose to. Sure. And there's a significant amount of barter going on right now between China and Iran. They just announced, for instance,
gold and oil.
I'm going to get to the RMB hubs in a minute. Mm-hmm. But I don't think it was so much gold for oil as it was oil and gas for other things, mm-hmm. like motorcycles, finished electronics. Like stereo units, various things, computers, Lenovo computer PCs, mm-hmm. whatever. So there was a statement that came out that said something around $50 billion was the Chinese-Iran bilateral trade. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, that sounds like a big number. Iran is 1/4 the size of the United States, so multiply by 4, you get 200 billion a year. That's getting on proportion to what U.S. and China has. Mm-hmm. And the voice shot back and said, Jim, 50 billion doesn't begin to cover all their barter trade. The bilateral trade has value around 150 billion. Wow. Between China and Iran. Okay, so barter is important. Brazil pointed out the yuan swap facility. It turned out to be a successful prototype. Now you've got all kinds of nations, including Australia, New Zealand, Britain, Germany, Switzerland, all kinds of nations doing bilateral swap facilities in yuan RMB with China. It's not dollar.
This is so huge. I mean, that sentence, the countries that you just named that are, okay, maybe they haven't set up brick and mortar hubs yet. Maybe they have. But the fact that this is happening is so massively huge. I mean, a handful of years ago, this was a one-off nation trying to do this, and then we would invade them because they had weapons of mass destruction or whatever. Gaddafi, I can't remember what we blamed him for. But this is huge. I mean, now, like, the rats are jumping the ship. I mean, it's unprecedented. I'm sorry. Keep going, Jim.
It is unprecedented. There was a story a couple months ago about how Luxembourg was getting involved with yuan swap facility and wanted to create a small hub. I'll get to the definition of what a hub is in a minute. But Luxembourg signed on with the swap facility, and I thought, gosh, that's kind of strange. Let me look into that. And I read more, and the Chinese, there's gosh, I think he's the vice premier. He's got a 2-letter name. There ought to be a rule. No Chinese can ever have a 2-letter name. I mean, come on. You can't have Li and Wu and Yi and Wo. This doesn't work. There are too many of them. Yeah. I've got a friend named Jay Chen. He was a good buddy of mine back 15 years ago. And he said, Jim, do you want to take a guess how many Chinese have the name of Chen, Cheng, Chuang, Chang, or Sang?
Better than half the population.
No, it's not. It's 350 million.
Okay, well, that's still considerable.
There are more variants of Chen than there are Americans in the United States.
God, that's unbelievable.
Okay, I get tired of these short Chinese names. Anyway, well, I can't remember his name. I think his name is Yi. I'm not sure. It's some 2-letter name. He's the vice premier. I mean, I don't mean to make light of this, but come on. I mean, maybe use 2 names. You know, Wei Fang instead of Wei.
Jim, is it your knowledge of statistical probability that makes this so difficult for you to grasp?
Yeah, there are only 26 squared names. I mean, come on, with 2 letters. So, okay, the Luxembourg event highlighted something for me that I wasn't really aware. I knew Luxembourg was a banking center because when I visited Kurt Rickenbacker in August of 2003, I mean, he's a very smart guy. He was the Austrian economist spokesman, and you know, the I don't know what you call him, the patriarch. Yes, and he gave me a check, and I said, "This is a Luxembourg bank." No, he showed me a check. He said, "Look, Jim, this is a Luxembourg bank. I don't bank in Germany. I don't even bank in France, even though I live in France." He lived in Cannes, in the French Riviera. Imagine the young jackass. Age 51, visiting Kurt Rickenbacker for a week, all afternoon chatting him up on economic stuff, and by evening he takes me out for a sumptuous dinner. And you know, he's a very smart man, but he was also a nasty SOB.
To be a fly on the wall, Jim. To be a fly on the
wall. He made his servant cry by a nasty act.
Yeah.
He insulted me on the first minute when I entered his doorway. So anyway, he showed me the Luxembourg check and said Luxembourg is the offshore banking center of Europe. Anyone who's anybody has a Luxembourg bank account. Mm-hmm. So when this story came up of Luxembourg signing up on the yuan swap facility, I read into it, and Yi pointed out that there were several Chinese banks in Luxembourg, and they do significant investment in their many managed funds. China's all over the place. Mm-hmm. So what is an RMB hub, and why are they important? An RMB hub is designed to handle 2 very important functions. The first is bond issuance, and it's not just Chinese government bonds. Britain actually has sold some government bonds for British government debt, securitizing their debt in yuan RMB denomination.
Wow.
McDonald's is the example often give, but I believe there are something like a dozen U.S. corporations that have floated corporate bonds in RMB denomination.
Wow.
So what's the benefit of that? Well, if the U.S. dollar has a lot of problem, you're not going to see a loss in your value of the bond on the world stage. Mm-hmm. Furthermore, you can attract Chinese investment, which does not have to convert to another currency. So the one function is the bond trading. So it's corporate bond issuance.
Mm-hmm.
It's government bond issuance. The second function of a RMB hub is to conduct the vast currency translation. They want to do a, say, conversion to the British pound. In Germany, they want to do a conversion to the euro. And later to any, say, new Deutschmark. Okay, so the two functions of a hub, RMB hub, are bond trade and currency trade, Forex and bonds.
Okay.
In the last year there were two enormously important announcements, and when they happened, my jaw dropped, my mouth went open. Oh my God, here we go. London announced they were going to develop an RMB hub, and so did Frankfurt. Mm-hmm. And here's the shocking forecast. The Voice basically pulled me, in an online version, he pulled me aside. He's like an uncle to me. He's like a professor in the classroom, but it's funny. He's not in the classroom a lot. His students are my group of 10, my colleagues, like Euro Raj and London Paul, and we've got a very bright guy with 3 successful businesses in Northern California. We've got a Comex trader I call George. We got a brilliant electronic engineer guy with a patent library who lives in Costa Rica here. We've got a fellow who's a mining expert, and I'm leaving a couple out. Sorry about that. But he pulled me aside and said, Jim, you need to understand, Germany has significant trade with China and Russia. They have 3,000 companies minimum in Germany doing business with Russia. Most of the growth from the German economy and the export side is with China and Russia. There's never been harsh words between China and Germany.
How about spying, Jim? Any spying?
No, I mean, we don't do that. Germany doesn't do that. Only the United States does that.
Right.
The United States invades with NSA, and before you know it, they're all over your telecom industry. And, they're not just trying to find out what Angela Merkel is doing for lunch and what restaurant she's going to be in. They want to know her sex toys so they can blackmail her.
Right. So no harsh words and no spying. These guys, it sounds like they actually want to do some real business together.
Right. Well, here's the value of these colleagues of mine. I'm just going to do a quick check to see who I left out. Rob Kirby. Rob Kirby is another brilliant guy on my team, and he is the expert on bonds, treasury bonds, derivatives, banking assets, reserve asset ratio, all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Now I've got a guy who's he's a real news hound. He's excellent. He's actually living in Peru, but he comes from the central U.S. states. He's an American guy. And he's from the mortgage industry. He's very, very bright on banking and financial matters, and he's a great news hound. Then there's lastly a fellow who's he's in law school now, but he has a successful website, and he really took to task Aaron took to task a lot of people, a lot of bankers who were doing corrupt things during the subprime bond era. Okay, so I got a little bit distracted there, but let's just focus here on what was I going to say? Yeah, about the Chinese. The Voice, yes, regarding Frankfurt versus London. The Voice said that there are a tremendous amount of new businesses being created in China with German roots. So that doesn't count as German corporate expansion except for the export trade.
Right.
Who does the German company trade to but their new Chinese subsidiary?
Right.
That counts as Chinese economic growth. And he said, he asked me a question. He likes to test me sometimes, but that's okay. I mean, I don't mind being tested. I usually did pretty well in school for examinations. He said, Jim, where do you think the best worldwide precision optics and precision. What do they call it? You know, at the nano level, you have these little motors. Or they have a server, servi motor, server. Anyway, it's servi something. I can't think of the right name. Where do you think that the world class comes? What nation has the world class of that technology? And I said, I don't know. I'm guessing Japan. He said, well, it's actually shared between Japan and Germany, but Germany is the leader. Uh-huh. So China is getting a lot of technology, not just from Japan, which is kind of like a knee-jerk, obviously. Mm-hmm. They're getting it from Germany. And if you take a look at the cranes and the construction equipment, earth movers, and all their big mining equipment, machinery in China, a lot of it's German, not just Chinese, not just Japanese. A lot of it's German. So the voice said, you're going to see a lot of capitalization. Now, by that I mean secondary stock issuance. Chinese company doing business in Europe wants to do a secondary stock issuance in Frankfurt to expand their corporation capital base in China and maybe have a subsidiary in Europe someplace, maybe in Germany, but Germany's kind of crowded. Mm-hmm. Who knows? Maybe it'll be in Greece. Okay, Chinese company in Greece, funded by capital output, capital layouts in Frankfurt. Mm-hmm. He said, Jim, here's my forecast. He said, I'm not even remotely unsure about this. It's a guarantee. In 5 years, Frankfurt is going to vastly overshadow London in the volume of their RMB hub business. Because China is going to choose Frankfurt, Germany for their bond and IPO. So the RMB hubs are going to expand from Forex and bonds into stocks. Chinese capital expansion. He said, look for them to overshadow London. He said, they're going to throw some bones at London to keep them busy.
Right.
And to make sure that they split from the Americans. Wow. Now, add Russia to the mix, and you see that the established lines of the 3,000 to 5,000 businesses in Germany doing commerce with Russia, are the Russian firms going to choose Britain? No, of
course not.
They're going to choose Germany after Germany is the initial country to say, we don't want your Russian sanctions no more.
Yeah.
So, back in the home front, we're going to lose Europe over these sanctions and war. Mm-hmm. And the Greek debt, the problems with Turkey, the Ukraine war, the sanctions with Russia, we're going to lose Europe. But on the home front, we see what looks like they're going to become RMB hubs in Toronto and Vancouver. And the U.S. can't stop this. The Chinese are buying up Toronto commercial property in a very big way. I'm told by my Chinese buddies, I've got a radio show host, I've got Rob Kirby, he's from Toronto, they're both from Toronto. I've got other clients, and they say all the same thing, 30 to 35% of all commercial property in Toronto is owned by the Chinese now.
Yeah.
Okay, so they've got their toehold. So will the Chinese do IPOs in New York and London? Or will they do it in Vancouver and Toronto?
Yeah.
If they don't decide to do it in Frankfurt. So if they've got a North American business, they're going to do it in Canada. Mm-hmm. And now we've got a new event. It began a couple months ago, and now it's becoming a little bit bigger, getting a little more attention. The Chinese do a lot of business. Oh, gosh, I had some data in my last report. I think it's something like 54%. I'm guessing. You have to sign up for the newsletter and read the March report. There's a nice come on. But I believe of the Chinese business in the United States, 54% of it goes through Los Angeles. That's significant. So Los Angeles has created what they're calling not an RMB hub, they're calling it an RMB center. And it's really just an expanded ICBC bank. And for Americans who are not up on financial events outside the United States, the largest bank in the world is ICBC. I think it stands for International Commerce and Business. No, I can't think of what Commerce and Business, or B and C, but I can't remember. Anyway, do you know what IBM means?
Just IBM. I did at one point, but I'm at a loss at this moment. Integrated. Wait a minute. Integrated. No.
You're close. No, I'm teasing you. What I'm doing here, I'm being kind of not nasty. I'm just being a little bit indirect. I could not come up with what ICBC meant, so now I'm going to make it so how it's clear that even IBM is not known. International Business Machines.
There we go. So you wanted to put it on me. I see, Jim. Thanks.
No, I want to share the blame, and I hope
I'll share it with you any day, brother. So you're telling me that the City of Angels now has a Chinese-owned bank or facility that in some way, shape, or form you believe is going to be expanded and completely involved in this RMB swap?
Yes, I do. I think eventually you're going to see the Los Angeles hub. And when I read the details of the Los Angeles ICBC Trading Center, they mentioned that it's a favorable location because of its distance from New York.
That's great.
Yeah. So I think we're going to see a lot of. I'm trying to look up what ICBC stands for. ICBC Bank, Industrial and Commercial Bank of China.
Okay, it's got China in the name.
It's the biggest bank in the world by assets. And this is kind of fun. It's not just a lecture here. We're having an actual conversation. It's fun. I enjoy interviews, and I particularly enjoy them with you, Will. I think we're going to see Los Angeles become an R&B hub. If they're already doing the function of the ICBC Bank that they wanted to, rename as an R&B center, they described currency translation there. They described meetings to conduct investment there. So, it's not Forex and bonds. Maybe it's Forex and just business investment contract signing. That's an important function. So what you're seeing is maybe from the back door side, ICBC is going to create an R&B hub in function, but maybe not name.
Right.
In Los Angeles. They've got a gigantic Chinatown. The Chinese own the Long Beach port facility. So I'm sorry, this is game over for the dollar. If you haven't figured that out, here we are after almost an hour in this show. If you haven't figured it out, the dollar's dead.